It was just another service call on a slow Thursday. The kind of job I almost passed off to someone else because, honestly, washing machine repairs weren't my favorite. But work had been thin lately, and a paycheck was a paycheck. The address came from a woman named Claire, who said her washer started making a weird grinding sound, then just stopped mid-cycle. Said she'd already watched 3 YouTube tutorials and gave up when water started pooling on the floor. The way she explained it, half frustrated, half apologetic, made me chuckle. I told her I'd swing by around noon. I expected what I usually expect on jobs like this: a cluttered laundry room, machine older than me, and someone hovering while I unscrewed things they didn't understand. What I didn't expect was her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire opened the door like she hadn't done it in a while. She smiled, polite but cautious, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. She looked like she was in her early 50s, elegant, well put together, but with this quiet, worn-in air about her. She had shoulder-length chestnut hair tucked behind her ears and wore a soft blue sweater that matched the cool tones of the house. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. Her voice was calm, almost too measured. Like she had practiced being calm. Her place was spotless in a way that felt intentional, like it was curated for someone else to walk into. Family photos lined the hallway, all dusted and straight, but there was an emptiness in them too. No recent frames, no candid clutter, just preserved moments, frozen in time. She led me down a short hallway to the laundry room in the back, and as we walked, she kept apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. The sound of the floor made the paint chipping near the baseboard, the pile of clean laundry on the counter. None of it was messy. If anything, it looked like no one had lived here long enough to make a mess. The laundry room itself was bright, with a big window that let in soft afternoon light. The washer sat quietly in the corner, a front-loader model with a door that refused to open. I crouched down to take a look, asking her a few questions about when it started acting up, what sounds it made, the usual. She answered politely, standing just behind me. But I could feel her eyes on me, not in a weird way. It's more like someone who wasn't used to having another person in the house and didn't know where to put that energy. As I unscrewed the back panel and began poking around inside, I asked how long she'd lived here. "For years," she said. "Moved in after the divorce." Her tone didn't invite more questions, so I nodded and kept working. But something shifted in the air when she said it, like she'd said too much, or maybe not enough. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just like both of us were choosing not to ask what we really wanted to. I found the problem: a small piece of fabric had gotten sucked into the drain pump, causing it to jam. Common issue, really, but one that tends to feel more catastrophic than it is. I explained it to her while I cleaned it out and started reassembling the machine. She nodded along, arms folded, eyes fixed on the floor. "So it wasn't broken?" she asked quietly. "Just stuck." I told her that's often how it goes. One small thing clogging up the works. Then, just as I was standing to test the machine, she said it quietly, almost like she was speaking to the room more than to me. "I haven't done laundry for 2. Since my divorce." I paused, hand still on the control knob. The words caught me off guard, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, like a confession, like something she'd been holding in for years and finally let slip. In the presence of a stranger, she didn't look at me, just stared at the machine, waiting for it to do something. I didn't know what to say, not at first. I'm not a therapist. I fix things. I unscrew and replace and tighten bolts. But in that moment, I realized sometimes the real repair job isn't what you're called in for. For a second, neither of us moved. The washing machine hummed softly, its cycle just beginning, water starting to fill the drum. Claire still hadn't looked at me. Her arms were folded tighter now, like she was bracing for something. Maybe judgment, or just the weight of having said the truth out loud. I didn't pry, didn't ask her anything more. I've learned over the years that some moments are better left to breathe on their own. So instead, I nodded slowly, crouched back down, and wiped off the panel before screwing it back in place. She finally broke the silence, her voice more relaxed now. Sorry, that probably came out weird. I just meant, it's been a long time since I had someone else here. Her tone was still composed, but something in her eyes shimmered like relief mixed with regret. I shook my head gently. Not weird at all, I said, keeping my tone soft. Sometimes life builds up in the machines too. She gave a little laugh at that, quiet but genuine. And I saw her shoulders drop just a bit. I stood up, brushed my hands on my jeans, and asked if she wanted me to stick around and test a full cycle to be sure. She hesitated, then said, "Actually, would you mind? I made some tea earlier. I could pour you a cup." I didn't have another job lined up that afternoon, and something about the moment felt unfinished, so I nodded. "Tea sounds good." She led me to the kitchen, which was as meticulously tidy as the rest of the house. Everything was in its place, not a dish in the sink or a crumb on the counter, but like the hallway, it felt preserved, not lived in. She poured 2 mugs of chamomile and handed me one, motioning for me to sit at the small round table by the window. As she sat across from me, she cradled her cup with both hands, like it was the only warmth she'd let herself have all day. I used to hate doing laundry, she said after a few sips, her gaze fixed on the backyard beyond the window. My ex always left socks everywhere, inside out, balled up like I was supposed to just guess which were dirty. We used to joke about it until it stopped being funny. I nodded, letting her talk. There was something freeing in her voice now, as if the sound of the washing machine turning behind us had opened up a door inside her. "He left 3 years ago," she continued. "Just packed a bag one morning and said he wasn't happy anymore. Said we'd become roommates who shared bills in silence." She gave a dry laugh. He wasn't wrong. I'd been pretending not to notice that for years. She paused, took another sip, then said, "You know what's funny? For the longest time, I still folded his clothes. Even after he was gone, just out of habit. I didn't speak. I didn't need to." She wasn't looking for advice or pity, just a witness. Someone to see her not as broken, but simply still here. Still standing. The first time I did laundry after he left, she said, I opened the machine and realized everything in it was mine. Just mine. And that felt ... huge and empty. She looked down into her cup, then back up at me. So I stopped. I'd wash things when I had to, but I never ran a full load again. Not for 2. She leaned back then, eyes glossy but dry. I think I'd been waiting for someone to notice. Not necessarily to do anything, just to notice. I set my cup down and said, "Well, I noticed. And for what it's worth, I think you've been doing better than you think." That made her smile, not the polite one from before, but a softer one. The kind that comes from being seen. Just then, the machine in the back clicked. She turned her head slightly, listening to it. "Hey," she said. It's been so long since I heard that sound without feeling annoyed. Her fingers traced the rim of her mug absent-mindedly, and I could tell she was somewhere between here and wherever her memories had taken her. Then she looked back at me and asked, "Do you think it's silly that something like a broken washer could feel like the final straw in a life already mended?" I shook my head. Not silly at all. Machines break for the same reasons people do wear. Pressure, time. Doesn't mean they can't work again. That made her quiet for a moment longer, and then she stood up. "Come on, let's go check the cycle." As we walked back down the hallway, I felt the house change, not physically, but emotionally, like something small had shifted in the air. Maybe it was the sound of the machine working again, or maybe it was the silence between us, now less heavy. She opened the laundry room door and watched the washer spin, clothes tumbling gently behind. The glass. "There it goes," she said. Then, almost to herself, doing its job, no complaints. I glanced at her, then at the small pile of clothes still folded on the counter. "Maybe this time you'll do a load for 2, I said quietly. She didn't respond right away, but I saw the way her lips curled ever so slightly. A nod, not of agreement, but maybe of possibility. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She lingered in the laundry room for a moment, watching the clothes spin like it was a slow dance she hadn't been invited to in years. There was something intimate about the sight of freshly soaked fabric tumbling inside glass. Something ordinary and tender. She didn't rush me out or say thank you in that the dismissive tone that most clients use when they're ready to be alone again. Instead, she turned to me, arms relaxed now at her sides, and said, "Would you mind helping me carry something down from the attic before you go?" "It's heavy," I agreed, without hesitation. Something told me this wasn't just about moving boxes. She led me to a narrow pull-down staircase in the hallway ceiling. The steps creaked beneath my boots, and the attic was dim and dusty, but neatly arranged. There were several plastic tubs stacked against one wall and a single trunk at the center, the old-fashioned kind with brass hinges and a worn leather handle. "That one," she said softly from below. "It has some of his things. I thought maybe it's time I moved it." I carried the trunk down carefully, and she guided me to the guest room. "Just set it by the closet," she said, gently against the wall, and turned, expecting her to signal that was all. But she didn't move. Instead, she sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the trunk for a long moment before speaking. I used to open it every few weeks at first, smell his cologne on the collars, read old birthday cards, then once every few months. Then, never. Her voice cracked slightly, the first visible fracture in her calm exterior since I'd arrived. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the most respectful thing you can offer someone who's remembering. She wiped at the corner of her eye and gave a quick laugh. "I'm sorry, this must be the weirdest job you've ever had." I smiled gently and said, "You'd be surprised." And I wasn't lying. I'd been called into homes where people broke down over more than just broken appliances. Heartache has a way of leaking through cracked drywall and leaking valves. This wasn't strange to me. It was human. She stood again, a little straighter this time, and asked if I could help her move the trunk into the closet. "Not to hide it," she clarified. "It's just to make space for something else." We moved it together, and the way she steadied the opposite end told me she wasn't as fragile as she appeared. There was strength in her, buried, but still there, like roots beneath frost. Back in the living room, the sunlight had shifted and cast long, quiet shadows across the hardwood floors. I glanced at the time. Nearly 2 hours had passed since I arrived. I didn't feel rushed to leave, though. Claire poured us both a fresh cup of tea without asking this time, and I took it as a sign that she'd decided I could stay a little longer. We sat near the fireplace.
Yeah.
It hadn't been used recently, but there were logs in the basket, dry and ready. "I always told myself I'd light a fire when I had company again," she said, half smiling. "I just didn't think it'd be some guy fixing the washer." I grinned. "Well, I'm honored to qualify as company." She sipped her tea and studied me with a new kind of curiosity. Not romantic, not yet, but the kind of gaze people reserve for someone who's stepped into their life unexpectedly and didn't immediately leave. She set her cup down and leaned back into the couch cushions, like she was finally letting herself rest. "You know," she said after a while, "when he left, I kept waiting for the part where it got easier. Everyone said it would, that I'd find a rhythm. But what they don't tell you is how quiet everything gets, not the peaceful kind. The kind that makes your skin itch." I nodded, understanding more than I let on. I think sometimes silence is just the echo of things we never said. She looked over at me then, flicker of recognition in her eyes, like I'd put something into words she hadn't known she'd been thinking. "Yeah," she said. "Exactly." The washer beeped from down the hall, a soft ding that marked the end of the cycle. She didn't move to get up right away, though. Instead, she asked, "Do you mind grabbing it for me?" Her tone was casual, but I knew better. She was letting me into a part of her routine that had been untouched for a long time, not just physically, emotionally. I walked down the hall and opened the washer. The clothes were still warm, the scent of lavender detergent rising with the steam. I gathered them carefully into the basket beside it and carried them back to the living room. "Where to?" I asked. She pointed to a small drying rack near the window. "There's something about air drying that makes it feel like less of a chore," she said. "We started laying things out together, and it was oddly intimate. It's not in the way that people touch or flirt, but in the quiet teamwork of two people doing something mundane that suddenly felt meaningful. A t-shirt stretched. Between us, a dish towel handed gently across the rack. It was a rhythm not of lovers, not of strangers, but something in between. As we finished, she looked at the small row of garments fluttering slightly in the breeze. "There," she said, "a load for two. First one in a long time." Then, she looked at me, and there was something soft in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for fixing the machine, for ... today." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and offered a quiet, "You're welcome." But inside, something told me this wasn't going to be the last time I saw her. By the time I made it back to my truck, the sky had started to shift, soft streaks of orange fading into a pale blue as the sun slipped lower. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, engine off, watching the silhouette of her home through the windshield. I wasn't stalling, not really. But there was a strange gravity in my chest, the kind you feel when something small just rewired a part of you didn't. No needed adjusting. Claire had let me into more than her laundry room. She'd let me into a moment in her life she hadn't shared with anyone in years. And even though I'd done nothing more than tighten a few screws and clear a pump, I left feeling like I'd repaired something far less tangible that night. As I ate dinner alone and flipped mindlessly through channels, I kept thinking about her. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but in the way a story sticks with you. I thought about the look on her face when she watched the washer spin, like it was performing some quiet miracle. I thought about her voice when she said she hadn't done laundry for two. That confession had cracked something in her, and strangely, it had settled something in me. I didn't expect to hear from her again. Most jobs end like ghosts. One day, I'm there, the next I'm gone, and life moves on. But 2 days later, I got a text. It was brief. "Hi, it's Claire. The dryer is making a weird noise. You're not too busy. Would you mind taking a look?" I smiled. Not because I believed the dryer was really broken. Maybe it was, but because I knew that wasn't the real reason she was reaching out. Still, I replied that I'd be free after noon and could swing by. When I arrived, she greeted me with a warmer expression this time. There was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. She wore a deep green sweater and jeans, hair loosely tied up, and she seemed more grounded. The house smelled like cinnamon, and the windows were open, letting in the crisp breeze. "Hope it's not too soon to bug you again," she said lightly as I stepped inside. "You're not bugging me," I replied, and I meant it. The dryer was in perfect working condition. I checked everything anyway, opened the back panel, inspected the vent, ran a short cycle, all smooth. She stood beside me, hands folded like she was waiting for me to say something profound. "Looks like it's just fine," I said, standing up and dusting off my palms. Maybe it just needed attention. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a half smile. "Don't we all?" "Oh." We stood there in silence for a beat too long, and then she laughed, breaking the moment with a nervous energy that felt more charming than awkward. "Would you like to stay for coffee?" she asked. I just made a pot. The old rules in my head, the ones about keeping work and personal life separate, started to stir, but they were too quiet to matter. I nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." We sat in the same spot as last time, but something had changed between us. The cushions still remembered the shape of our bodies, but now they knew the sound of our voices too. She poured 2 mugs and added a splash of oat milk to hers. "Habit," she said, "even though I don't really like it." I raised a brow. "Then why do it?" She shrugged. "I guess it makes me feel ... consistent, like some things haven't changed." The conversation drifted easily. We talked about music. She liked old folk records, the kind with crackling vinyl and scratchy vocals, and she asked what kind of work I did outside of repair. I told her I used to do more construction, but lately it was small jobs, quick fixes. It paid the bills, and sometimes it gave me stories to carry. She smiled. "So I'm a story now?" I smirked back. "Only the good kind." She looked down at her mug, then out the window again. "It's been 3 years," she said, "since the divorce, and I still sometimes set 2 plates out without realizing it." Her voice was calm, but there was a layer beneath it, not sadness, exactly, but a kind of tenderness that only comes from time and ache and memory. I used to hate how quiet the house got. Now I think I've just gotten used to the echoes. I listened, sipping slowly, and let her words hang between us. They didn't need to be answered. They just needed to be heard. After a while, she asked if I could help her move a shelf in the study. It's been leaning weird since I rearranged things. I followed her down the hall, noting the subtle changes she'd made: a new rug, a plant by the window, a small candle flickering on a table. She was reclaiming the space in quiet ways. The shelf wasn't leaning. It stood firm, steady, but I adjusted it anyway, pressing gently against the frame, checking the base. "Looks good now," I said. She nodded, not looking at the shelf but at me. "Thank you again for not making this weird." "Welcome. Though I still have no idea what this is." She smiled then, really smiled, and said, "Neither do their first, but it's nice." As I packed my tools and walked toward the door, she followed me, hesitating just before I stepped out. "You're not just a story," she said quietly. "You're a moment I didn't expect, and I think I needed that more than I realized." I looked at her, that same softness in her voice echoing the very first day I'd arrived. I knew, even if nothing came of it beyond this strange, gentle connection, that something inside both of us had been pulled loose. And maybe that was enough. The days that followed had an unusual stillness to them, as if my time at Claire's house had left a small echo in the rest of my week. I went back to my usual rounds, replaced a garbage disposal, fixed a couple of leaky faucets, even installed a ceiling fan for an elderly couple who insisted on paying me in both cash and warm banana bread. But none of it stuck with me the way those quiet moments at Claire's did. It wasn't about the laundry or the dryer or even the conversation. It was about the weight of someone letting you into a space they'd spent years keeping shut. You don't forget that kind of invitation. A few evenings later, while I was organizing tools in my garage, my phone buzzed. It was Claire again. "Do you happen to know anyone who could help haul out an old dresser?" I'd try myself, but I'd probably break it toward my back. I stared at the message for a few seconds, the corners of my mouth tugging into a smile, before I typed back, "If it's the same Claire with the lavender-scented laundry, you've got the right guy." The next morning, I drove back to her house. It was starting to feel familiar, the way the trees arched gently over her street, how her mailbox tilted slightly to the left, the flower pots on the porch still standing with that single brave bloom. Claire opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been waiting near it. She looked different, not in a drastic way, but in the subtle confidence that comes when someone starts moving forward. She wore jeans with flecks of white paint on the thighs and an oversized flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up. Her hair was tied in a loose knot, and she had a smudge of something, probably dust, across her cheek. "Hope you don't mind the mess," she said, stepping aside. Bin decluttering. Her living room was filled with half-filled donation boxes neatly labeled in sharp black marker. Books, clothes, random crap. I raised an eyebrow at that last one, and she shrugged with a grin. Figured honesty was the best policy. She led me to the guest room, where the old dresser stood, pushed up against the far wall. It was a heavy oak piece, beautifully made but clearly worn down from years of use. "It was his," she said simply. "I never liked it, just kept it because getting rid of it felt like admitting something." She looked at me then, eyes steady. "But I think I'm done keeping things that don't feel like mine." We worked together in comfortable silence. I lifted one end, she steadied the drawers. It was heavier than it looked, but we managed to maneuver it through the narrow hallway and out to the curb. I offered to haul it off entirely, but she shook her head. "No, let it sit there a while. I think I want to see it gone with my own eyes." When we returned inside, she poured 2 glasses of iced tea and gestured for me to sit in the dining room this time. The table was cleared now, no more stacks of unopened mail or decorative clutter, just a single candle flickering in, the middle unscented, plain white. It's the kind that's more for presence than fragrance. We talked more easily now. She asked about my work, where I grew up, what I did before I started fixing things for a living. I told her about my old man, A plumber who taught me how to strip a pipe and fix a leaky faucet before I knew how to drive. I mentioned how I used to think I'd be something else, maybe a writer or a teacher, but somehow I ended up where I was. She listened like every detail mattered, not because she was curious in that passive, polite way, but because she actually cared to know. Then, she asked something unexpected. "What made you stay?" I tilted my head. "At your house," she nodded. "You could have fixed the washer and left. But you didn't. You stayed. Came back. Up with the shelf, the trunk, now the dresser." She wasn't asking out of suspicion. There was no edge in her voice. Just a quiet wonder. The kind that comes when someone's not used to people showing up without needing a reason. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I think because you let me in without realizing it," I said slowly. "Didn't just need something fixed. You needed someone to see the space between what was broken and what was healing. And maybe I needed to see that too." Claire blinked slowly, lips parting as if to respond, but then she just nodded, letting the words settle in the space between us like dust catching sunlight. Outside, a breeze picked up, rustling the trees and sending a few fallen leaves tumbling down her porch steps. Eventually, I stood to leave. I had another job in the afternoon, and as much as I wanted to linger in the strange warmth of that kitchen, I also knew timing mattered. Sometimes leaving a moment while it's still whole is better than waiting for it to lose its glow. At the door, she paused before opening it. "You've been kind to me," she said. "Not just polite, not just helpful, but kind." I didn't quite know what to say, so I said the truth. "So have you." Then she surprised me. She reached out and touched my arm, a gentle squeeze just above the elbow. Not flirtatious, not forced. Just real. "Come back sometime," she said, softer now, "even if nothing's broken." I gave a small nod, then stepped outside. The dresser was still sitting on the curb, the morning light catching on its worn handles. I glanced back once before driving off and saw Claire standing in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching the wind carry dust down her driveway, not as someone waiting for something, but as someone finally starting to let go. A week passed before I heard from Claire again. I didn't expect to, not because I thought she was finished with me, but because something told me she needed space, the kind you give someone who's just begun pulling the thread on the life they've held together for too long. But when her name finally lit up on my phone, there was no hesitation in my chest. It felt inevitable, like two puzzle pieces that kept bumping edges until one finally clicked into the other. Her message was short, almost casual. "I finally lit the fireplace, thought you'd want to know. No request for help, no excuse, just a statement." "And an unspoken invitation?" I typed back without overthinking it. "Want some company?" A minute later, she replied, "Only if you bring marshmallows." I stopped by a small corner store on my way over, grabbed the marshmallows, and tossed in some graham crackers and chocolate bars while I was at it. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not entirely, but it was something, and I knew she'd noticed the thought behind it. The moment I pulled up to her house, I could already see the flicker of firelight through the front window. It danced against the walls like it had been waiting for me. She greeted me in the same flannel shirt from before, but this time it was buttoned all the way up and layered with a knit cardigan. Her hair was loose, curls soft around her face, and she looked for the first time entirely relaxed in her own home. Just a quiet kind of welcome. Inside, the living room had transformed. The boxes were gone. The furniture had been subtly rearranged. The air smelled faintly of pine and something sweet, vanilla, maybe, and in the fireplace, flames crackled gently, warming the space like an old friend who'd finally come back. "Wasn't sure how to get it started," Claire admitted, handing me a poker as we settled near the hearth. "But YouTube is a miracle." I chuckled, nudging a log into place. It always feels like a big deal the first time, lighting a fire. It's not just warmth, it's claiming space. She looked at me thoughtfully, her face lit orange and gold from the flames. "Yeah," she said softly. "It feels like I just took something back." We sat side by side on the rug, a plate of s'more supplies between us. I watched as she burned her first marshmallow, laughing at her own impatience. "It's been forever since I've done this," she said, licking chocolate from her finger. "I used to think this kind of night was only good if you were in love. But maybe it's even better when you're just content." I nodded, savoring the way she said the word content, like it was an unfamiliar but welcome guest. "Content's underrated," I replied. "It sneaks up on you, usually when you stop chasing something." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned back, resting her elbow against the arm of the couch, legs stretched toward the fire. "You know what's funny?" she asked after a long pause. "When I was married, I used to dread quiet. Nights like this, it made the distance between us feel even louder." She glanced over at me. "But now, with you here, it doesn't feel like silence anymore. Just ... calm." The moment settled between us, unspoken and unpressured. I didn't lean closer. I didn't reach for her hand. I just stayed, breathing in the firewood and sugar, letting the moment be what it was. Eventually, she stood and disappeared down the hall, returning with an old photo album. "I found this in one of the boxes I was going to throw out," she said, sitting back beside me. "Thought you might want to meet the version of me who used to smile without hesitation." She opened the album carefully, like it was made of something fragile. There were photos of her as a young woman, hair longer, eyes brighter, always in motion. Beach days, family dinners, a blurry shot of her dancing in the living room with someone who must have been her ex-husband. She paused at that one, her fingers resting on the corner of the image. "I miss her sometimes," she said, "but I don't want to go back to her. I just want to learn how to become someone new without losing the parts of me that mattered." Her voice wasn't sad. It was resolute. A woman who had mourned, healed, and now stood somewhere in between. "That's why I texted you, not because of the fire. It's because I didn't want to light it alone. There was nothing to fix this time. No broken appliance, no shelf too steady, no load of laundry to carry. Just a woman learning how to sit in her life again, and a man lucky enough to be invited into that moment." I stayed a little longer than I planned, not because she asked me to, because something in me didn't want to leave. When I finally stood, she followed me to the door. The fire still flickered behind us, soft and steady, casting long shadows. That felt more comforting than cold. She touched my arm as I opened the door, the same gentle squeeze from last time. But this time she didn't let go right away. "Next time," she said, her voice low, "maybe we build the fire together, start to finish." I met her gaze, saw the promise in it. Not a promise of love, not yet, but of something real. A beginning, cautious, hopeful, unspoken. And I nodded. "Next time," I echoed, then stepped into the cool night, the scent of smoke clinging to my jacket like a memory I didn't want to wash off. I didn't rush the next visit. I let a few days pass, not out of hesitation, but out of respect. Some moments need room to breathe before you step into the next one. I kept myself busy. A water heater replacement, 2-door hinge repairs, a call from a landlord about a broken ceiling fan. All of it routine, all of it forgettable. But every time I drove past a bakery or smelled wood smoke or felt the chill of late autumn air, my mind wandered back to Claire's fireplace and the quiet way she'd said, "Maybe we build the fire together next time." Then one morning, as I was loading tools into my truck, my phone lit up with a simple message. "I bought the wood. Just need a spark." There was no question in my mind where I'd be that evening. I arrived just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the tree line, the sky turning soft with shades of gray and peach. Her porch light was already on, and from the window, I could see the familiar golden flicker of the fire waiting to be born. She opened the door before I knocked, this time in a cozy slate blue sweater, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. "Chamomile," she said before I could ask. "But I made coffee too. I figured you're a coffee guy. You figured right?" I smiled. She led me inside, and the house felt even more like hers now. The scent of cinnamon had settled into the walls. A few new picture frames lined the mantel. The blanket was draped across the arm of the couch, folded neatly, like someone who was expecting comfort. In the hearth, the logs were stacked, with care, but unlit. She glanced toward them. "I promised myself I wouldn't start it until you got here." I knelt by the fireplace, pulled a lighter from my coat pocket, and sparked the kindling at the base. The flame caught, timid at first, then bolder, spreading upward into the logs like breath returning to lungs.
Ow.
Claire crouched beside me, watching the fire grow with quiet reverence. For a few moments we said nothing, just sat in the glow, watching the flame climb and settle into its rhythm. When she finally spoke, it was with the same gentle honesty I'd come to know. "The first winter after you left," she said, "I didn't light a single fire. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't think I deserved the warmth." She looked over at me, not seeking pity, just understanding. "It sounds stupid, I know." "It doesn't," I said. "Not at all." She stood, brushing her hands against her knees, and walked toward the kitchen. "I made dinner, by the way. Don't get excited, it's just soup and grilled cheese, but it's homemade." I followed her, drawn by both the scent of something savory and the growing comfort of her company. We ate at the kitchen table this time, a small square thing tucked into the corner by a window. It was the first time I'd seen her eat with someone else. There was something quietly intimate about the way she placed the bowls, set the napkins, poured the water like she was relearning what it meant to share a space with someone, between bites of soup and the occasional hum of a song from the radio. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me about a book she'd started reading, something poetic and sad. The kind of novel you don't read for answers, just the company. I told her about my weekend plans to fix a friend's barn door and maybe catch a movie if I had time. It wasn't profound. It didn't need to be. Sometimes companionship is just being allowed to exist beside someone without performing. After dinner, we returned to the fire. Claire tucked her legs beneath her on the couch, and I settled into the armchair across from her. She had a glass of red wine now, and I had coffee that was going lukewarm in my mug. The fire crackled, occasionally popping with a sharp snap that startled the silence just enough to make us laugh. Then came the question. Not out of the blue, it had been circling us all night, waiting for the right moment to land. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit, let it settle in the corners of the room. Then I nodded. "Yeah, I do. Not all the time. Sometimes, it sneaks up on me, like when I'm watching TV and realize I'm laughing out loud to no one, or when I fix something and have no one to tell. It's not the kind of lonely you can solve with noise. It's the kind you feel even in a crowd." Claire exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as if she'd been holding her breath waiting for that answer. "Exactly," she said. "I've been 2 parties, family dinners, even joined a book club once. But none of it made the silence go away." She looked into the fire, her face glowing. "Except lately, it's been quieter, softer. We didn't talk much. After that, there was no need. We sat there, 2 people who had once lived their lives around absence, now sharing presence. It wasn't romance, not quite. But it was something, a trust, a rhythm. As the fire burned low, I stood to leave. Claire walked me to the door again. This time with no words, just a smile that lingered long after I stepped outside. The air was cool and crisp, but it didn't chill me, not that night. Because something had shifted. As I reached my truck, I turned back. She was still therein. The doorway, hand on the frame, watching. This time I raised my hand in a small wave, and she waved back. Not goodbye, just ... Till next time. 3 days went by before I saw Claire again, but not a single one passed without her drifting across my thoughts. It wasn't obsession, just the gentle kind of pull that happens when someone has started to root themselves in your everyday moments. I'd reach for my phone without meaning to, and catch myself mid-scroll through our last conversation, rereading her words as if they might change the more I looked at them. They didn't, but somehow they kept meaning more. On the 4th day, I found myself with an unexpected pocket of time. Client rescheduled, and instead of rushing off to another job, I drove to the edge of town where a weekend market was being held. It was small, nestled in the park near the library, with white tents flapping gently in the breeze and the smell of fresh bread and roasted nuts carried on the wind. I didn't have a plan, I just wandered, till I saw a little wooden sign that read, "Hand-poured candles, sense of memory." I paused, then stepped inside the booth. The woman behind the table was warm-eyed and wore a bandana over her hair. "Looking for something special?" she asked. I glanced across the rows of candles, each labeled with names like First Rain, Old Pages, Warm Flannel, Sunday Kitchen. My eyes landed on one labeled Freshly Folded Laundry. I picked it up, gave it a slow sniff. It was subtle, lavender, cotton, a hint of vanilla. "I'll take this one," I said. I didn't explain why. I didn't need to. That evening I stopped. By Claire's again. I hadn't told her I was coming, but as I walked up her driveway, I saw her on the porch, curled up on the swing with a book in her lap and a throw blanket over her legs. She looked up as I approached and smiled, not surprised, not startled, just ... glad. "I was hoping it was you," she said as I stepped onto the porch. "I brought something," I replied, handing her the small paper bag with the candle. She took it with a curious look, opened it, and lifted the candle to her nose. Her eyes closed as she inhaled. When she opened them again, something behind them had softened. "It smells like those early mornings when I used to do laundry before the kids woke up, before everything got complicated." She looked at me. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," I said quietly. She stood, motioned toward the door. "Come inside. I just put on some soup. Don't worry, it's a new recipe." The kitchen was glowing with the golden light of early evening, and the scent of carrots and herbs wafted through the air. We moved like we had done this a dozen times, setting the table, pouring water, clinking spoons against bowls, like two people who had settled into the gentle rhythm of being around each other without pretense. We didn't fill the space with talk. There was a comfort in the silences now, like they belonged to both of us. After dinner, Claire lit the candle I brought and placed it on the mantel beside the fire. The scent drifted through the room, weaving between the cracks in conversation and the soft hum of the radio. She turned to me as I leaned against the wall near the window, mug of tea in my hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said, voice hesitant. "Anything," I replied. "Have you ever felt like you were rebuilding something and didn't know what it would look like in the end? It's like you're fixing it piece by piece, but you're not sure if it'll be the same as it was before or something entirely new." I didn't answer right away. I walked over, took a seat beside her on the couch, and stared into the candle's flame. "All the time," I said. "Most things I fix, appliances, furniture, even fences, they're never exactly how they were when they were new. Sometimes they end up better, not because they're perfect again, but because they've been cared for." She leaned into the back cushion, eyes glassy but not with sadness. "I think I'm tired of trying to make my life look like it did before." "Then don't," I said softly. "Let it be something new." We sat in that for a long moment, the firelight flickering across her face, the shadows soft and forgiving. Then she turned to me with a smile that held something braver. "Would you stay a little longer?" she asked. "There's something I want to show you." She led me down the hallway, past the laundry room, to a door at the end I hadn't noticed before. She opened it slowly, revealing a small, cluttered room. Boxes, folded linens, a few old paintings stacked in the corner. "This was supposed to be my studio," she said, "for the divorce, before I lost the nerve." She reached for a light switch, and a soft glow filled the room. There was an easel by the window, a canvas covered in dust. She walked over, wiped it clean with her sleeve, revealing a half-finished painting of a sunset over water. "I used to paint," she said. "Stopped the year everything fell apart. I thought maybe if I didn't finish this one, the part of me that painted would still be waiting for me." I stepped forward, took in the bold brushstrokes, the emotion hiding beneath the colors. "It's beautiful," I whispered. She looked at me. "Would you help me turn this into a space I can use again?" "Not tonight. I'd be honored." She smiled, and it was different this time. Fuller, freer, the smile of someone remembering herself. And in that room filled with dust and dormant dreams, I realized something. I hadn't just walked into her house to fix a machine. I'd walked in to witness her begin again. I came back the following Saturday with a plan, not just a list of tools. and paint swatches, but something quieter, the kind of plan that lives in intention more than action. Claire had asked me to help her reclaim her studio, and I knew better than to treat that request like another job to tick off my schedule. This was personal, sacred even. The first step of someone returning to a version of herself she'd almost left behind. When I arrived, she was already in the driveway, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back, a tray of coffees balanced in one hand. "Black for you," she said with a grin, handing me the cup. "I remember, you always do," I said. We went straight to the back room, the so-called studio. It still carried the scent of dust and disuse, but today it felt different. Not forgotten, just paused. As I started moving boxes and rolling up the old rug, Claire pulled open the windows, letting the late autumn air sweep in. It smelled of drying leaves and possibility. We worked in tandem, no instructions needed. She'd hand me brushes while I sanded the rough corners of the window frame. I'd hold a stack of canvases while she dusted off shelves that hadn't seen sunlight in years. There was a rhythm between us now, unspoken and easy. At one point, she knelt beside an old drawer and held up a mason jar of paintbrushes, some stiff with dried acrylic. "Do you think they can be saved?" she asked. "Some," I said, taking one gently, "and the ones that can't? Maybe it's time for new ones?" She nodded like that meant more than it sounded. "That's kind of how I feel lately," she said. "Like I'm trying to figure out what parts of myself are still usable." I didn't say anything, just kept wiping down the frame of the easel she once used. The moment didn't need commentary, just presence. By late afternoon, the room had transformed. It's not finished, not even close, but transformed. The clutter was gone, the window glass was clean, and the easel stood upright again, proud and ready. Claire stood in the center of the room, brushing a streak of paint off her cheek with the back of her hand. "It's weird," she said. "I thought once this space was cleared, I'd know exactly what I wanted to paint. But all I feel is open. Maybe that's the point," I said. "Maybe you're not supposed to know yet." She looked at me then, really looked. And for a moment, I thought something was about to shift. She took a step forward, then stopped. Her fingers twitched slightly, like she was reaching for something invisible. And then she said something that caught me off guard. "You remind me of someone I used to imagine." I blinked. "What do you mean?" I used to think about what it would be like if I ever started over. After everything ended, I'd wonder. If I could ever sit with someone again without feeling like I had to explain all the cracks first. Like, "Here's everything broken about me. Still want to stay?" Her voice cracked slightly. "And then you showed up. Not like some movie ending, just quietly fixing things. Staying, not asking for anything." The air grew heavier, in the best way, dense with truth. She was telling me, in her own way, that I mattered. That I'd come to mean more than either of us had planned. I didn't know what to say, so I reached out and gently touched her wrist, letting my thumb trace the edge of a faint paint stain on her skin. "You don't have to explain anything to me," I said. "I see you, all of it, and I'm still here." She smiled, but there was something flickering behind it, a hesitation. "That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because I like you," she said. "More than I should. And I don't know if I'm ready for what that means." Her vulnerability hit me like a wave. Not because I hadn't felt the same, but because I hadn't expected her to say it aloud. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," I told her. "We're not on a timeline. There's no rush." She nodded, her expression softening. I don't want to mess this up. You're the first person who's made this place, this life, feel like something worth stepping back into." "You won't mess it up," I said. "But even if you did, we'd fix it. That's kind of my thing, remember?" It made her laugh, really laugh, the kind that lifts the whole body for a second. Yes. It broke the tension in the best way, like sunlight cracking through after a storm. We spent the rest of the evening rearranging her art supplies and setting up a small shelf for her sketchbooks. She didn't paint that night. She didn't need to. Just opening the door again, just standing in the center of that room without flinching, that was enough. That was creation in itself. Before I left, she walked me to the door as always. But this time, she didn't let go right away. Her hand lingered on my arm, her eyes searching mine. "Next week," she said. "Would you come back again?" I think I want to try. Actually painting something. I'll be here, I replied. Whether you paint or just stare at the wall. She laughed again, and then, for the first time, she leaned forward and kissed me on the cheek. It was brief, warm, and entirely deliberate. Not a mistake. Not an impulse. A decision. I walked to my truck with that kiss burning gently on my skin, like the memory of Friel. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes the deepest healing doesn't come from fixing what's broken. It comes from being the one who stays when someone finally lets go of what they've been carrying for far too long. The following Tuesday, Claire texted me just after lunch. It was simple, like most of her messages. Would you be up for helping me hang a shelf in the laundry room? That was all. No emojis. No hints. Just the kind of request that might seem casual from the outside, but I'd come to understand the subtleties in her words. The laundry room, the place where this entire story had begun, the machine I had repaired weeks ago had almost faded into the background now, but something told me she hadn't forgotten. Neither had I arrived with my usual toolkit and a bag of wall anchors. She met me at the door with a soft smile and her hair loosely tied back, strands falling across her face like they always did when she was in her natural state, a little unguarded, a little unfiltered. I followed her inside, and sure enough, the laundry room had been cleaned up since I was last in it. The detergent bottles were aligned. A woven basket of folded towels sat on the dryer. A small potted plant rested. On the windowsill, a peace lily maybe. And beside it, leaned against the wall, was the shelf. I thought this space could use a little something more, she said, motioning toward the wall above the machines. A place to put small things that matter. I nodded, already reaching for my drill. Good idea. Want to mark where it should go? She hesitated, then stepped forward and pressed her fingertip gently to the wall, leaving a small pencil mark. Here, she said, right above where I used to keep his things. I paused mid-motion, the drill still in my hand. She didn't look at me, just kept her eyes on the wall. I used to leave space for him, she continued, voice steady, but laced with an edge of emotion. His detergent, his dryer sheets. He liked the lavender kind, said it reminded him of his grandmother's house. When he left, I didn't touch that corner for over a year. I'd just keep walking past it like it still belonged to someone. Put the drill down slowly, unsure if this moment needed tools or simply listening. I didn't invite you here just to hang a shelf, she finally admitted. I needed to see if I could reclaim this space, really reclaim it, without pretending. It was still shared, without feeling like I was betraying something. I stepped closer, careful with my silence. She turned then, and our eyes met. There was pain there, but it wasn't raw anymore. It was processed, digested. It's like something she had carried long enough to finally start setting it down. You. No, she said, her voice softening. When you first came to fix the washing machine, I thought it was just another repair. Something routine. I didn't expect it to become a turning point. Neither did I admitted, but here we are. She let out a small breath and smiled, a half smile, but real. Let's hang the shelf, she said. I want this space to be mine. Again, we worked in tandem as we often did now. I marked the studs, leveled the wood, and she held it steady while I drilled. When we finished, she stepped back and stared at it like it was a painting. It's just a shelf, she said. But it feels like a chapter closing, or one starting, I offered. She nodded. Yeah, that too. Then, unexpectedly, her phone rang from the kitchen. She excused herself to answer, and I stayed behind, quietly tidying up my tools. But I could hear her voice carry faintly down the hallway, and something in her tone changed. It wasn't angry or panicked, just strained. When she returned a few minutes later, she looked distracted. Everything okay? I asked gently. She hesitated, then offered a tight smile. That was my ex-husband. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He's going to be in town this weekend. For our daughter's birthday. She's turning 21. Wrapped her arms around herself. He wants to stop by. Said he has some of her things to drop off. The air shifted. It wasn't jealousy that I felt. It was the ghost of old pain brushing against the new ground we were building. Are you okay? With that? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. He hasn't been here since the day he packed his things. I've been trying to imagine how I'll feel seeing him stand in this doorway again. You don't have to pretend it's easy, I said. It's okay to feel whatever you feel. She looked at me then, eyes wet, but not spilling over. What if he sees me, ... like this? In the middle of something new? What if it makes everything more complicated? Then let it be complicated, I said. But don't shrink yourself to make it easier for him. You've worked too hard too. Get here. She reached for my hand, her grip firm and trembling at once. Would you stay? When he comes? Not for him. For me, just so I don't feel like I'm alone in the room again. I nodded without hesitation. Of course. She leaned into me then, resting her forehead briefly against my shoulder. And in that quiet moment, with the scent of fresh wood and detergent in the air, I realized something. Healing wasn't a straight line. It curved and looped, revisited old rooms, invited past ghosts back through the door just to show them they no longer lived there. Claire wasn't trying to erase the life she had before me. She was learning how to build something new beside the ruins of what once was, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly a part of that foundation. The day her ex-husband was set to arrive dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky itself were bracing for something uncomfortable. The wind moved through the trees with that restless kind of energy, and I found myself watching the forecast more than usual, even though there was no real reason to. I wasn't worried about rain. I was worried about the emotional storm it might bring. I showed up an hour early at Claire's request. When I walked in, she was already in the laundry room, straightening the shelf we'd hung days ago. Her movements were nervous, not frantic, but too precise. It's like someone trying to exert control over the few things that would stay still when everything else was in motion. You look like you're preparing for a museum exhibit, said gently as I entered. She glanced up, forcing a smile. I feel like I'm about to walk into a courtroom. I crossed the room to stand beside her. You don't owe anyone a defense, least of all him. She nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes went to the window, tracking the driveway like it might offer an early warning. He's not staying long, she said after a moment. Just said he wants to drop off a few boxes and maybe talk for a bit. I told him I had company. That was the truth. What do you need from me? I asked. She looked at me, a flicker of gratitude in her tired eyes. Just ... be here. Be real. I need something solid to hold on to, if it all starts slipping. I was about to reassure her again when we heard the tires crunch on gravel outside. Her breath hitched almost imperceptibly, but I noticed. She squared her shoulders like someone putting on invisible armor. And we walked together to the living room. The knock at the door was soft, but unmistakable. Claire paused, breathed once, then opened it. There he was. Her ex-husband stood on the porch with 2 boxes in his arms, and the same boyish face I'd seen once in a photo on her mantel, though older now, weathered at the edges. His eyes darted to me for a moment, then back to her. Hey, Claire, he said. Mark, she replied, her tone neutral, neither cold nor warm. Come in. He stepped inside, the boxes balanced awkwardly, and set them down on the table near the entryway. These are Ella's, he said, her journals, some old drawings, a couple photo albums she wanted back. I found them in the garage, Claire nodded, stepping slightly to the side, but not toward him. Thanks. Mark looked around the room, his eyes taking in the fireplace, the furniture, the shelf of books that hadn't been there when he left. Then they landed on me again. I don't believe we've met, he said. I stepped forward, steady. I'm Luke. I've been helping Claire around the house. Repairs, projects, just trying to be useful. His gaze lingered a little too long, but he nodded politely. Right. The silence that followed was heavy, not quite hostile, but thick with all the things that went unsaid between people, who once promised each other everything and ended up handing it back in pieces. Claire finally broke it. You said you wanted to talk. Yeah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I just ... I don't know. It's been strange, seeing Ella grow up, being around her more these last few months, realizing how much I've missed. I guess I've been thinking about a lot. He glanced at her again. About us. What went wrong? Claire's face stayed still, unreadable. It's been for years, Mark. I know, he said quickly. And I'm not asking for anything. I'm not trying to stir things up. I just ... Seeing the house again, walking in here. It hit me harder than I thought. You've changed things. Yes, she said. I have. Another silence, shorter this time. Mark shifted uncomfortably, then let out a half-laugh. I guess it's good that things look different now. Means you've moved on. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward and reached for the shelf above the washing machine. She placed a small framed picture on it, a photo of her daughter from last summer, laughing on a hiking trail, sun in her eyes. Then she turned back to Mark. This space used to feel frozen, she said, like it belonged to someone who left and hadn't really given it back. Now it belongs to me again. And Ella. Mark looked at the photo, then at her. I'm glad, he said. And for once I believed he meant it. He turned to go, then hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. He seems like a good guy, he said, nodding toward me. Claire looked at me, and she looked back at Mark and simply said, he is. That was the end of it. Mark stepped outside, and the door closed behind him with a finality that felt quieter than slamming. But more permanent. Claire stood still for a moment, then exhaled so deeply I thought she might collapse with the weight of it. I crossed the room and reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation, while she whispered, that was easier and harder than I expected. I nodded. You did great. I didn't cry. You didn't have to. She looked at me then, and her eyes shimmered, not with grief, but with something new, relief, resolve. I was afraid that seeing him again would take me back, she said. But it didn't. It just reminded me how far forward I've come. We stood in the middle of her living room, two people holding on to a truth that had just been tested and survived. And in that moment I understood something. Letting go doesn't always happen in one clean cut. Sometimes it's a slow untangling, a quiet reclaiming of spaces and stories and shelves. And sometimes it's standing beside someone who never asked you to fix their past, just to be there while they step fully into their future. The next few days moved more slowly than usual, not in a dull or dragging way, but like time had softened around us, less urgent, more reflective. Claire didn't text right away after her ex-husband's visit, and I didn't push. I figured she needed space to breathe, to process everything. That had come rushing back when he stepped over that threshold. But by Friday afternoon, just as the sun was slipping low behind the trees, my phone buzzed with a message. Would love some company tonight. No projects, just dinner. You in? Stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled and typed back, I'm on my way. When I pulled up to her house, the porch light was already on, casting a soft golden glow across the front steps. The smell of something savory floated through the open windows. Garlic, herbs, maybe a hint of lemon. Claire met me at the door. Wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hair tucked behind one ear, barefoot. No tools tonight? She asked with a teasing smile. No tools, I confirmed, holding up 2 bottles of root beer. But I did come armed. She laughed and stepped aside to let me in. The kitchen was warm, and the table was already set. Mismatched plates, cloth napkins, a candle flickering between us like it was trying to keep its presence subtle. I wasn't sure what you liked, she said, motioning to the spread. So I made pasta and roasted vegetables. Maybe got a little carried away with the bread. Looks amazing, I said honestly. We sat down and ate without rush, without scripts, just small stories and sips of soda between bites. Claire talked about Ella's birthday dinner, how it had gone surprisingly well, how her daughter had hugged her extra long before leaving for school again. I shared a story about a plumbing disaster at another job, one that involved a raccoon and a very unfortunate basement. We laughed more than I expected to. It felt natural. And when the plates were pushed aside and the candle burned lower, the conversation shifted into that quiet, thoughtful tone that always comes late in the evening when bellies are full and guards are down. "I've been thinking about the laundry room," Claire said suddenly, tracing the edge of her napkin. "Not the shelf or the machines, but that moment. When I told you about not doing laundry for two?" I nodded, remembering it clearly, the weight in her voice, the vulnerability in her eyes. "I think I told you that," she continued, "because I was scared I'd forgotten how to share space, not just physically, but emotionally. It had been years since I'd let anyone close enough to see my mess. And then you walked in with your toolbox and didn't flinch. "It was just a washing machine," I said softly. "No," she replied, looking at me. "It was never just about the machine." She stood up then, walked over to the kitchen window, and looked out at the backyard. The moon was climbing over the treetops, casting silver light across the lawn. "I kept thinking about what you said, about not rushing, not being on a timeline. It stuck with me, because for so long, I felt like I had to prove I was okay, to my friends, to my daughter, even to myself. But with you, it doesn't feel like proving. It just feels like being." Stood too, not wanting to sit while she stood there bearing her heart like that. "I don't want to scare you," she said. "I don't want to leap too far ahead, but I also don't want to pretend this isn't real." I stepped closer, just behind her shoulder. "I'm not afraid of real," I said. "I'm here because of it." She turned then, slowly, her eyes searching mine for something, confirmation maybe, or permission, and I gave it to her. Not with words, but by gently brushing her hair back behind her ear and resting my hand against her cheek. "You've rebuilt a whole life here," I said, quietly. "And if there's room in it for me, ... I'd like to stay." Her smile was soft, almost sleepy with relief. She leaned into me, and this time when she kissed me, it wasn't a question, it was a declaration. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in a stillness that felt like belonging. No fireworks, no music swelling, just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the trees outside, and the knowledge that we were choosing this slowly, intentionally. Later, we moved to the couch, curled beneath a shared blanket like two people who'd been doing this for years. She rested her head on my chest, her fingers loosely curled around mine. "You know?" She murmured, "There's something strange about how healing works. It doesn't show up when you demand it. It sneaks in during the quiet. It's in the middle of a laugh, or over pasta, or during laundry, or in the silence after," I added. She nodded against me, and for the first time since I'd met her, I felt her truly exhale. Not just physically, but emotionally, like she was finally letting herself sink into something soft after years of keeping her back straight and her heart guarded. And I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just a chapter for her. This was the start of a new book. One she was writing one page at a time, with brush strokes and dinner plates in the hands of someone who had come not to fix what was broken, but to stay long enough for her to believe she could build something new. The days that followed were stitched together like a quiet, familiar melody. No major events, no declarations, just a rhythm between us that felt natural, comfortable. I found myself coming over more frequently, sometimes with a toolbox, sometimes with nothing at all. Claire started calling it our rhythm. The words sat sweetly in the air each time she said them. We didn't try to define things. There were no conversations about what this was or where it was going. Instead, there were movie nights on her old corduroy couch, mismatched mugs of tea after dinner, shared grocery trips where she would argue over which brand of granola tasted better. The house felt warmer, like the light inside had finally caught up with the sun outside. And with every passing day, Claire seemed more at ease within her own skin. One Wednesday afternoon, I showed up to fix a rattling window in the guest room, and found her in the art studio with paint on her face and the biggest grin I'd ever seen. She didn't hear me at first. She was lost in the motion of her brush, her whole body swaying slightly as if the rhythm of the strokes guided her breath. I leaned against the doorway and watched, not wanting to break the moment. When she finally noticed me, she looked almost embarrassed. "I got inspired," she said, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist and streaking yellow paint across it by accident. "I can see that," I said, stepping into the room. "You've got sunshine on your face?" She laughed, and the sound was music. She turned the canvas slightly, revealing a burst of abstract color blues, golds, reds swirling into one another like emotion poured directly onto linen. It wasn't anything specific, but it felt like something real. It's like energy captured in motion. I didn't plan it, she said. I just started, and the weird thing is, I didn't even think about what it meant. I just let myself feel. That's the best kind of art, I replied. She looked at me for a moment, then reached for my hand. You're part of this, you know. Me? I asked. Yeah, you. Showing up, listening, fixing things without demanding anything in return. It reminded me how good it feels to just create. For the sake of it, I squeezed her hand gently, then kissed her forehead where the paint was already drying. You did this, Claire. I might have handed you a wrench or two, but you built this piece yourself. She smiled again, but I could sense a hesitation behind her eyes. That hesitation revealed itself the following morning. I arrived at the house to find her pacing the front porch, her phone in hand and a deep crease in her forehead. I just got a call, she said as I approached. Good news or bad? I asked. Neither, or maybe both. I've been invited to submit a piece for a gallery show in the city. An old friend forwarded them some of my work photos I posted months ago. They want something new. That's amazing, I said, genuinely excited. It is, I think. She bit her lip. But it's in San Francisco. The opening is in 2 weeks. If I accept, I'd need to go for at least a week, maybe longer. Took a breath, letting the news settle between us. Do you want to go? I do, she said quickly. But I'm scared, not of the travel or the show, but of what it might stir up. I've worked so hard to rebuild this space, this life, and now that it feels steady, the idea of shaking it again terrifies me. Claire, I said gently, you didn't build this life to stay hidden in it. You built it so you could step out of it when you were ready without falling apart. She looked at me, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. But what if stepping out means stepping away from you? The question hit deeper than I expected. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd wrapped myself into this little world we'd created. The thought of her being gone, even for a week, left a hollow thump in my chest. I'm not going anywhere, I said, voice steady. Whether you're in this house or across the country, I'll be here, cheering you on, waiting with fresh coffee when you get back. She let out a soft laugh, wiping at her eyes. You make it sound easy. It's not, I admitted, but the hard stuff. That's what makes it worth it. We stood there for a long moment, holding hands on the porch while the morning breeze moved through the trees around us. Eventually she nodded, the decision settling into her like a leaf landing softly on water. I'll call them back, she said. I'll say yes. And she did. That night, she packed her first canvas into a protective case. Carefully wrapping the edges like they were fragile glass, I helped her organize paints, brushes, and supplies. We worked side by side, the way we always did, her with purpose, me with quiet support, but beneath it all I felt something shifting. A subtle gravity pulling us toward the next stage of whatever this was. It wasn't a goodbye, it wasn't even distance. It was growth, hers, and, in a way, mine too. Because when someone you care about is brave enough to chase something that once scared them, the only thing to do is cheer them on, and trust that the bond between you will hold Evan across miles, even through silence. That night, just before she turned in, she said, "You've been the quiet in my storm, Luke." I looked at her, my heart aching in that strange, beautiful way that only comes when you love someone not for what they give you, but for who they are becoming. And you, I said, have been the color I didn't know I was missing. Fell asleep that night under the same roof, knowing that the next chapter would ask more of us, but feeling somehow more ready than ever to meet it. The morning Claire left for San Francisco, the house felt unnaturally quiet. She'd asked me not to come with her to the airport, saying goodbye at the front steps instead, soft, slow, like letting go of something delicate. She was dressed in travel clothes, her hair pulled back, her suitcase in one hand and her portfolio in the other. She smiled, but I saw the nerves flickering behind her eyes. "I'll text when I land." she said. "I'll be waiting," I replied. We hugged. Not quick, not lingering, just right. Then she climbed into the car, and I stood in the driveway until the taillights disappeared around the corner. That first day without her was the hardest. I walked around the house like a guest, not quite belonging. The mug she'd used that morning still sat on the kitchen counter, and I found myself rinsing it slowly, like touching something of hers might bridge the distance. I kept busy. Fixed the creaking cabinet in the hallway, swept the back deck, sorted the spare parts I'd left scattered in the garage, but every now and then my phone would buzz and everything else would fade. Just boarded. The airport coffee is terrible. There's a guy next to me who keeps talking in his sleep. Might draw him later. Landed. It's colder than I thought, but it smells like something good is always cooking here. Her messages were little windows into her world. Not constant, but just enough to keep us tethered. She didn't need me to fix anything from across the country. She just wanted me to listen. And I did. Every word, every emoji, every silence. Between them, by the second day, she had her first gallery prep meeting. She sent me a picture of the space, white walls, wide windows, natural light pouring across polished floors. Her painting leaned against one of the walls, wrapped in plastic, waiting for its moment. "It looks smaller here," she texted, "but maybe that's good. Maybe it means I've grown." I stared at that message longer than I meant to. I'd never met anyone who could say so much in so few words, though I missed her. I was proud of her too, for stepping into a space that once felt too big and claiming it anyway. Nights were the loneliest. I found myself sitting on her couch, replaying old conversations in my mind. I'd glance at the empty spot beside me and wonder if she felt the same emptiness on her hotel bed. Once I fell asleep with my phone in my hand, only to wake at 2:17 a.m. to a photo she'd sent of the city skyline, lights glittering like stars trapped between buildings. "Couldn't sleep," she wrote. "This place is loud in a different way, makes me miss your quiet." On the third day, she had a small panic. The frame she'd ordered for her painting arrived with a scratch across the bottom panel. She called not to vent, just to steady herself. "I know it's not the end of the world," she said, her voice tight. "But it's like the moment I started to believe in myself, something snapped back to remind me not to." "Let a piece of wood decide your worth," I said gently. "You made something beautiful. A scratch doesn't erase that." There was a long pause. Then she sighed. "We always know what to say." "Only because I'm always listening," I replied. That night, she found a framing shop 2 blocks from the gallery. They rushed a replacement, and by morning, everything was back on track. She sent a picture of the final piece hung on the wall, centered, balanced, proud. "Openings tomorrow. Wish you could see it." Stared at the image for a long time. Something about seeing her work in that space made me realize this trip wasn't just about her art. It was about her reclaiming her voice, her space, her sense of worth outside of motherhood, outside of divorce, outside of grief. She wasn't just displaying a painting. She was showing the world that she had survived and that she could shine. On the night of the show, I didn't hear from her right away. No photos, no updates, just silence, figured. She was busy mingling, explaining her work, soaking it all in. Still, I kept my phone on the armrest, glancing at it every few minutes. Then finally, at 10:43 p.m., my screen lit up. They clapped. That was all she wrote. But somehow, it was everything. The next morning I got a call. "I want to tell you." "Something," she said, her voice still hoarse from the night before. "I'm listening." I stood in front of that painting and felt like I wasn't just showing art. I was showing a piece of myself, something I've kept locked up for years. When people came up to me asking about the colors, the emotions, I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. "I know," she whispered, "and that means more than the applause." There was a pause, and then she added, "I'm flying back in 2 days. To be at the airport. Of course," I replied. "You didn't think I'd let you carry your bags alone, did you?" She laughed, and the sound washed over me like a tide coming back in. And in that moment, I knew something for sure. This woman who once apologized for being too quiet too messy, too broken, had become a thunderstorm of strength. And she wasn't done growing. She was only getting started. And me. I was just grateful to be invited into the storm. The day Claire flew back, I arrived at the airport an hour early. I don't know why her flight updates were steady. There was no delay. No other concerns, but something inside me itched with anticipation. I paced the terminal, watched couples reunite with tearful hugs. Families cluster together, drivers hold up signs for strangers they didn't know. And in the middle of it all, I stood still, waiting for a woman who used to be afraid of asking for help, who had once whispered broken truths in her laundry room, and who had since stood alone in a gallery, unafraid. When Claire finally came through the gate, I almost didn't recognize her at first, not because she looked different, though she did, in a subtle way, but because something about her had shifted. Her posture was straighter, her stride more assured. She moved through the crowd like someone who had stepped out of her own shadow and decided not to crawl back in. She spotted me, smiled, and waved with her carry-on slung across one shoulder. I met her halfway, taking her bag before she could even suggest I do so, and she laughed softly at my usual predictability. "You made it," she said, a touch of surprise still in her voice. "I said I would," I replied. We walked to the car. In comfortable silence, she told me about the plain food, the man next to her who snored like an engine, the cab driver who tried to sell her real estate halfway through the ride, but beneath it all, I could sense she was still processing something, deeper, something that couldn't be summarized with small talk or emojis. When we got to her house, I carried her suitcase inside and stopped in the living room. Claire stood at the door, breathing in the scent of her home, that subtle mix of lavender, paint, and warm wood that made it uniquely hers. She closed her eyes for a second, not because she was tired, but because she was grounding herself. "Does it feel different?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Not different, just smaller." We both knew what she meant. When you stretch yourself, when you grow, the places that once held you don't shrink, but your perspective does. She had gone out into the world and seen what else was possible. Her return wasn't about comfort. It was about integration, taking that new strength and weaving it into her life here. "I unpack later," she said, tossing her keys on the console. "For now, I just want tea and quiet." I made us both mugs chamomile for her. Black for Mahand, we settled on the couch. For a while, we just sipped and listened to the hum of the neighborhood outside. Kids riding bikes, lawnmower in the distance, wind teasing the leaves against the window. Then Claire turned to me and said, "Can I ask you something? Anything?" "Did you stay?" Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was curious, even a little vulnerable. When I pushed people away, when I froze or got scared or overthought things, "Why didn't you walk?" I set my mug down slowly, weighing my words. "Because I saw you," I said. "Not just the surface stuff. Not the insecurities or the hesitation. I saw the woman who paints at sunrise and leaves little notes in the margins of her books. I saw someone trying not for anyone else but for herself. And that mattered to me." She looked down, blinking hard, then reached over and rested her hand on mine. "You saw the mess too," she whispered. "I saw the strength beneath it." The quiet between us grew warmer, heavier. And then she did something I hadn't expected. Leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "I want you here. Not just now, but later. Not just when it's easy, when it's hard to." That confession felt like a doorway unlocking, because for months we'd danced around the edges of what we were, drawn together by timing, pain, healing, laughter, but we'd never defined it, never put labels or expectations. Maybe that's what made it real. We didn't need fireworks to announce love. It had grown like roots, slow and steady, beneath shared meals and quiet looks. "I want that too," I said. "But only if we keep doing it our way. No pressure, no roles. Just you and me figuring it out one day at a time." She smiled. And it wasn't the smile of someone who'd just returned from a trip. It was the smile of someone who'd returned to herself. That night, we'd cooked dinner together again for the first time in what felt like years. Nothing fancy. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, and a bottle of red wine she'd brought home from California. We talked about her trip, about the people she met, about the gallery owner who asked to keep her peace for another showing, and then we made plans. Not big ones. Not the kind you scribble on calendars or announce to friends. Just little dreams. She wanted to repaint the studio in spring colors. I offered to build her a shelf that could double as a drying rack for her canvases. She wanted to visit her sister 2 towns over and asked if I'd come with her. I wanted to take her hiking in the fall, show her the ridge where the trees turned orange like wildfire. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It was ours. And for the first time since I knocked on her door to fix a broken machine, I felt like I belonged in the story, not as a visitor, not as a helper, but as a chapter. All my own. As we cleaned up the dishes that night, Claire paused and said, "You know, I never told you what happened the day I bought that washing machine." I looked at her, surprised you didn't. She shook her head. It was the day I signed my divorce papers. I drove to the store because I needed to feel like I was making a choice, like I could still build something new. "And you did," I said quietly. She met my gaze and replied, "Yeah. I just didn't know then that what I was building wasn't a new routine, it was a new beginning." And standing there with our fingers still damp from washing plates and our hearts unguarded, I realized something. This wasn't just her home anymore, it was ours. A few weeks after Claire came, home life settled into a new rhythm. Familiar, but not stagnant. She spent her mornings in the studio, light pouring through the windows while she painted with purpose. I worked on a handful of home projects, sometimes at her place, sometimes elsewhere, but my truck always found its way back to her driveway by sunset. Dinners, laughs, books shared across her coffee table. We were building something soft but real, day by day. And then came the phone call. It was a Thursday afternoon. It's one of those crisp, early autumn days where everything feels calm. I was at my own place, cleaning out the shed, when my phone buzzed with Claire's name. Her voice was warm, a little breathless, but layered with something else. "So, something weird happened," she said. "What kind of weird? You remember David? My ex-husband's best friend?" I searched my memory. "The one who helped you move out after the divorce." "Yeah, him." She paused. "He's in town." He stopped by the gallery. My stomach tightened, not with jealousy, but with that old, instinctive tension that comes when a ghost from the past wanders into your new world. "Why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Said he was visiting family, wanted to see what I was working on. He was actually kind. More than I expected. We talked for a while." "That's good," I said, though my throat had gone dry. Claire must have sensed it. "It didn't mean anything, Luke. I didn't invite him in or anything. I guess I didn't expect to feel so shaken afterward." "What do you mean?" she exhaled. He asked if I ever thought about reconciling. "Not with my ex, just reconciling the past, making peace with what fell apart." I didn't know what to say. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said, "It's hard to build something new when the blueprint still has someone else's fingerprints on it." Silence sat heavy between us. "And do you believe that?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. I thought I'd moved on. But part of me wonders if I've just painted over the cracks instead of repairing the foundation. That hit deeper than I expected because I'd fallen for Claire not just for who she was becoming, but for who she had been flawed, healing, brave. But hearing her question the integrity of what we were building made something uneasy stir inside me. Later that evening, I went over. The porch lights were already on, and she met me at the door wearing that soft gray sweater I loved. We didn't say much at first, just hugged a little longer than usual. There was no storm, no argument, just a quiet current pulling us a few steps apart, even as we sat side by side on the couch. "I'm not going back," she said after a while, "to that life, to him." "That chapter is closed." "I know," I said. "But that doesn't mean the pages can't still echo." She looked at me. "Do you think we rushed into this? Into us?" That question landed like a soft blow to the ribs. Not because I hadn't thought about it myself, but because hearing it out loud made it real. I think we found each other at the right time, I replied. But that doesn't mean we don't have baggage. I've got mine too. She reached over and took my hand, running her thumb along the edge of my knuckles. What if I still have parts of me that are afraid to trust? What if something small like a conversation with someone from the past can shake me this much? What does that say about me? It says you're human, I answered, and it says you're trying, which is more than most. We sat there, holding the weight of the truth between us. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a fight. But it was a reminder that no matter how strong the foundation, love still needed constant tending. It wasn't just about warm dinners and sweet mornings. It was about holding space for the mess, the memories, the unexpected doubts. I don't want to lose what we have, she said, voice almost breaking. You won't, I promised. But I do think we need to be honest with ourselves and each other. We've come a long way, Claire, but maybe we still have work to do. She nodded slowly, and I saw the fear in her eyes soften, replaced by resolve. I don't want you to feel like you're competing with a ghost, she whispered. I'm not, I said. But I want to know that you believe we're building something that's strong enough to last even if the past knocks on the door now and then. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I believe in us. I just needed to hear that it's okay to wobble sometimes. I kissed the top of her head. Wobbling means we're still standing. That night, as we fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, I realized something important. Love isn't proven by how smoothly things go. It's tested and strengthened when the old cracks try to split us again and we decide together to fill them with something stronger. We didn't fix everything that night, but we faced it. And in doing so, we added another layer to the trust we'd been building all along. Because sometimes, the real measure of connection isn't how tightly you hold on when things are easy, it's how gently you catch each other when the past tries to pull you apart. 2 days after that heavy night, Claire left a note on my windshield. It wasn't long, just a torn sheet of sketchpad paper tucked beneath my wiper blade. Scribbled in bold black marker were 5 words: pack a bag, 2 nights, no signature, no explanation, just curiosity, and the scent of adventure hanging between the lines. I found her standing on the porch later that evening, the duffel bag at her feet, 2 steaming travel mugs in hand. She wore jeans, boots, and a look in her eyes that said she was ready to reclaim something, maybe not just joy, but spontaneity. Something that had lived quietly in her for years and was finally waking up again. Where are we going? I asked. As I took the mug north, she replied with a mischievous smile. Cabin, fireplace, woods. I figured it's time we remind ourselves why we like this. Whatever this is, I smiled, both surprised and impressed. Is this your way of saying I need a vacation? It's my way of saying we need one? The drive was peaceful, 2.5 hours of winding roads, late autumn trees brushing gold and rust against the windshield. We played music, shared snacks, argued over whether or not salted popcorn belonged in trail mix, and took turns guessing the stories behind the houses we passed. It was simple, easy-like slipping into a rhythm we didn't know we missed. The cabin she'd rented was tucked near a lake, surrounded by pines and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but whole, complete. Inside, there was an old fireplace, a small kitchen, and a pair of oversized chairs by a window that looked out toward the water. No TV, no Wi-Fi. Just the 2 of us and a stack of firewood. That first night, we cooked pasta from a box and opened a bottle of red wine we'd picked up from a roadside store. We ate by candlelight not because it was romantic, though it was, but because the overhead bulb buzzed annoyingly and she insisted on cutting it off for atmosphere. See, she said, grinning as she poured more wine. Isn't this better? Kind of magical, I admitted. After dinner, we curled up by the fire. Claire brought her sketchbook. I brought a paperback I hadn't finished in months. But neither of us really dove in. We kept pausing, pointing things out in the flames, sharing thoughts, laughing at old memories. At one point, she leaned into me and whispered, I like you better without distractions. I like you better when you're being bold, I whispered back. She raised an eyebrow. Bold? You renting a cabin? Planning a trip? Leaving a note on my truck like something out of a spy movie? She chuckled. I figured if I waited until I felt completely ready, we'd never go. And after everything last week, I didn't want fear to decide what I did next. That moment sat between us like a gift, because in relationships, recovery isn't just about apologizing or explaining. Sometimes it's about replacing heaviness with lightness, choosing joy, even when uncertainty still lingers. The next morning, we took a walk around the lake. The air was cold, but not biting. Mist hung low on the water, and leaves crunched beneath our boots. Claire brought her camera. I watched her photograph things most people wouldn't notice: shadows under branches, the reflections in puddles, the way frost kissed the edges of rocks. You see beauty everywhere, I said, watching her work. See possibility, she corrected. Even in the broken stuff. Especially in the broken stuff. That afternoon, we made grilled cheese and tomato soup again. Our now unspoken comfort, Milan played an old deck of cards we found in a drawer. She cheated. I let her. We kept score until we forgot who was winning, which was the whole point anyway. That night, we built a bigger fire. Claire pulled out a small tin box she'd brought from home. Inside were folded slips of paper, each labeled in her handwriting. I looked at her puzzled. They're ideas, she explained. Things I want to do, things I used to dream about, but forgot along the way. I reached in and pulled one out. Take a dance class. I raised an eyebrow. Really? She laughed. Don't judge me. I used to love dancing. I pulled another road trip with someone I trust. My heart softened. You're crossing that one off then. She nodded, suddenly serious. I didn't know I was allowed to dream again until recently. But now, I want to make room for things. For mess. For movement. For new memories. We spent the rest of the night pulling ideas, reading them aloud, talking about what they meant. Some were small, some wild. All of them were her every hope she'd locked away during years spent surviving. And now, slowly, she was choosing. To thrive. When we packed up the next morning, neither of us wanted to leave. But we both knew it wasn't about escaping the world. It was about remembering we had each other to face it with. On the way back, Claire reached over and rested her hand on my knee. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For being the kind of man who doesn't ask me to be perfect, who just asks me to be. I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. And as we drove down the winding road, with golden leaves dancing past the windows and the future unwritten before us, I realized something. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fanfare or finality. Sometimes it's just a weekend away. Shared. Smile. In the quiet decision to keep showing up one small moment at a time, coming home after that cabin weekend felt different than any other return I'd ever experienced in the past. Returning meant dropping back into the routines that waited with open jaws: emails, errands, half-finished projects that tugged at the sleeve like impatient children. But this time, coming home with Claire meant continuing, not restarting. The cabin had been a pause in the song, not the end of it. And we were ready to play the next verse. Claire moved with more ease, more groundedness. She smiled more. She wasn't overthinking everything I said or questioning every silence. We'd stretched something between us, and it hadn't snapped tight. Had held, and now it was stronger. We fell back into our rhythm, but there was more laughter now. We joked while doing groceries, raced each other down hardware store aisles, cooked together more often, sometimes even in silence, our movements in sync like choreography. And I noticed little things changing. Claire started painting with bolder colors. She used to stick to safe, muted tones: grays, sage, rust butt now. Deep reds, electric blues, even neon yellow appeared on her canvas like emotion unbottled. One morning, I was fixing a loose hinge on her back gate when Claire walked outside holding her phone. Face pale, eyes darting. I just got a message. She said, from who? She hesitated, then handed me the phone. It was a Facebook message. It's from her ex-husband. The message was short. I heard about the gallery. Congrats. Maybe we can talk sometime. There are things I never said properly. I handed the phone back without reading it a second time. I didn't need to. Claire sat down on the porch steps. Her hands trembled slightly, and I saw the old weight creeping back in the fear that the past might be knocking again, not gently this time, but with boots. I haven't heard from him in years, she said. Not once. Not even on my birthday. And now he's proud of me? What do you want to do? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She shook her head. I don't even know. Part of me wants to delete it and move on. Another part of me, I don't know, wonders what he thinks he never said. Wonders if I need to hear it just to close the door tighter. There was a long silence between us. I didn't press. I'd learned by now that Claire wasn't someone you could rush, especially when the ghosts of her past rose up like this, and I didn't want to become another voice trying to tell her what to do. I just wanted to be the man who stood by her as she figured it out. Do you think it's dangerous? She finally asked, talking to him. Only if you expect something from it, I said honestly. If you go in thinking it'll give you closure, or some neat little bow to tie on the past, you might get disappointed. But if you go in just to hear him out, knowing you don't need it to be okay, maybe it could help. She looked at me. Would it bother you? It was a hard question, and one I'd already turned over in my head a dozen times. Yeah, I admitted. But not because I don't trust you, because I know what it's like to open wounds that almost healed. She nodded slowly. Then I won't. You sure? I'm sure. I've built something with you, something real. And I'm not willing to invite confusion into it just because someone got curious too late. Later that night, she sat at her laptop and blocked him. No message. No drama. It's just quiet closure, done on her terms. I watched her close the lid, then walk into the kitchen, pour a glass of wine, sit beside me on the couch like nothing had happened. But something had happened. She had chosen US not out of obligation, but with intention, and that changed everything. A week later, the gallery reached out again. They wanted to feature her in an upcoming winter exhibit. Not just a wall this time, but a full section of paintings, all hers. It was the kind of offer that made her breath catch and her knees weak. I don't know if I can finish that much work in time, she said, panic creeping in. You can, I said, and I'll help however I can over the next few days. Our world became paint and canvas and coffee and late nights. Built stretchers, sanded frames, made grocery runs. Learned more than I ever expected to know about drying times and pigment saturation. Claire painted like a woman possessed, not frantic, but focused. Every brushstroke was another step toward reclaiming her identity. She'd let go of the past. Now she was painting her future literally, and somewhere between helping her organize her studio and falling asleep on her couch covered in bits of sawdust. I realized something quietly monumental. This wasn't just her story anymore. I was no longer the man who showed up to fix a broken washing machine. I was the man who stayed. The man who helped her sort through grief, cluttered, doubted, made space for joy, confidence, and laughter to return. And maybe, just maybe, I was also the man who'd be there for whatever came next. One evening, as we sat on the floor eating takeout among finished canvases, Claire reached for my hand and said, I don't think I ever really believed someone could love the real me, not just the version I cleaned up. You never had to be cleaned up. For me, I said, I fell in love with the woman who had a broken machine and a bigger heart. She laughed through a soft sob. That's the most ridiculous and beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me. And then she leaned in and kissed me, not like a thank you, not like a promise, but like a truth she was finally ready to believe. That she deserved love. That she was whole again, that we were together, something lasting. It was early December when the final painting was hung. Claire stood in the center of the gallery, arms folded across her chest, silently studying the wall that now bore her name in bold. Black lettering, Claire Donovan Reclamation. 12 pieces surrounded her, colorful, bold, full of light and edge. Each painting told a story, but together, they formed something larger than she ever imagined. A declaration. The exhibit opening was only a few days away, but Claire had insisted we arrive early, just the two of us. The gallery owner had given her an hour alone to walk the space, and I was honored to be the only other person she invited. I stayed a few steps behind as she moved from piece to piece, sometimes nodding to herself, sometimes pausing with that same expression she wore when something stirred deep inside her. At one point she turned to me and whispered, "I never thought I'd see my name like this again, not as someone's wife, not as someone's helper, just mine, just Claire." "You earned this," I said. "Every stroke, every scar, every restart." She walked toward me, her eyes shining in the dim lights. "And you?" Her voice caught slightly. "You helped me believe I was still capable of more." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to say something profound. Part of me knew silence held weight too. So I reached for her hand instead, and we just stood there, soaking in the proof of how far she'd come. Later that night, we walked home beneath Christmas lights strung lazily through the trees downtown. Claire was quiet, which wasn't unusual, but her silence tonight carried a different energy. Not heavy, but reflective. "You okay?" I asked. She looked up. "Yeah, just processing. For the first time in a long time, I feel like everything's aligned. Like I'm no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop." I crossed the street and reached her front door. She paused, key in hand, then turned to me. "Will you stay here tonight?" she asked. I smiled. "Of course. No, I mean," she took a deep breath, "not just tonight. I mean, maybe longer, maybe always." I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. She laughed nervously. "That sounded awful. What I meant was, I want you here. I want this house to feel like yours too. I know we haven't really talked about next steps, but I've been thinking, and yes," I said, cutting her off gently. She blinked. "Yes, I'd move in tomorrow if you asked." Her shoulders relaxed and a grin broke across her face like sunlight after a storm. "Well, about Saturday?" She laughed, the kind of laugh that fills the chest and lifts the soul. "That weekend, I packed up the essentials, just a few boxes at first. Some clothes, my tools, a box of books, a handful of things that had long outlived their usefulness, but held too many memories to part with." Claire cleared space in her closet and drawers before I even got there. She made room, not just physically, but emotionally. And I realized that was the most intimate thing anyone had ever done for me, not offer love, but make space for it. We spent the next few days rearranging things, merging mismatched mugs, setting up a shared workspace in the sunroom, and making jokes about whose throw blankets were more aesthetic. We turned minor disagreements into laughing fits. We cooked together, and one night we even tried baking, and ended up with a flour explosion that left both of us breathless on the kitchen floor.
Laughing like kids.
One evening, after the chaos of merging lives had finally calmed, we sat on the couch with tea. The fireplace crackled, and snow began to fall softly outside. Claire leaned against me and said, "You know what I haven't done since I moved here?" "What's that?" "Laundry for two." I smiled. "Want to cross that off the list?" She grinned and stood up, grabbing my hand. "Come on, you're folding towels whether you like it or not." We walked to the laundry room, small, tucked between the kitchen and the hallway. She opened the washing machine lid and looked at me with mock seriousness. "This is a historic moment," she said. I chuckled. "Want me to take a picture?" She laughed. "Nope, I want to feel it. The mundane miracle of it." We loaded the machine together. Our clothes mixed like our lives. No separation, no sorting needed. When it started humming, she leaned against the doorframe and looked at me. "Do you think this is it?" she asked. "The real thing?" "I don't think it," I said. "I know it." She stepped closer, resting her forehead against mine. I used to believe that love came with fireworks, that it had to be loud, dramatic, overwhelming. But this, you folding socks next to me, you fixing my porch light without me asking, sitting through an art show, even though you don't care about brushstroke technique. "Hey," I said playfully, "I care a little." Laughed. "This is what real love looks like, isn't it? It's quiet," I said, "but it stays." We kissed slow, simple, steady. And as the washing machine whirred in the background, I realized that this woman, who once said she hadn't done laundry for two since her divorce, had finally opened the door to share her life again. Fully, freely, fearlessly, and I was lucky. Enough to be the one standing in that doorway, carrying my half of the laundry basket, and everything that came with it. Life didn't become a fairy tale after I moved in with Claire. There were no perfect mornings with birds singing outside the window, no magically resolved conflicts, no montage of smiling days without end. What we had instead was something better. Real life, with all its mess and magic. We had burnt toast, and mismatched schedules, paint-stained sweatshirts, and half-folded laundry. But we also had shared coffee, forehead kisses, long talks on the porch, and quiet evenings with our legs tangled on the couch, doing nothing and everything all at once. Claire's winter exhibit was a glowing success. On opening night, she wore a deep green velvet dress, her hair pulled back in a low twist, eyes sparkling like someone who had finally stepped into her own skin. I stood beside her, not as her date or handyman or helper, but as her partner, the man she trusted with. Her art, her heart, and her space. People wandered through the gallery, sipping wine and studying her pieces with fascination. I watched as she spoke to strangers about her work, not timidly, not with the self-doubt she used to wear like armor, but with confidence and clarity. She wasn't hiding anymore. It's not behind her past, not behind her pain. At one point, an older couple approached us, the woman tilting her head at a painting of tangled sheets and warm light. "This one," she said to Claire, "feels like love after heartbreak." Claire smiled and nodded. "That's exactly what it is." Later that night, we walked home hand in hand, the cool air nipping at our cheeks. Claire looked at me and said, "Tonight was the first time I ever introduced myself without thinking about who I used to be." "You were never just someone's ex-wife," I said. "We're always Claire. Brilliant, stubborn, funny, gorgeous." "Claire?" She smirked. "You forgot excellent grilled cheese, chef." "Ah, of course, that too." We laughed, and beneath the laughter was the kind of peace that can't be faked. A peace earned by showing up when it mattered most, by leaning in instead of walking away, by choosing growth over comfort. The days that followed weren't loud, but they were full. We fell into small traditions: Friday movie nights with too much popcorn, Tuesday evening walks before dinner, Sunday mornings spent lazily with the newspaper and her sketchbook sprawled between us on the bed. I even started helping her prep canvases for commissions, learning how to build frames that didn't wobble and how to gently iron. Wrinkled linen with a kind of reverence that made her laugh. "You treat my canvases better than you treat your clothes," she teased one afternoon. "Argue your art deserves more respect than my socks." But the real turning point came unexpectedly, as they always seem to. One Thursday, Claire came home from the grocery store with a second laundry basket. She handed it to me casually, without fanfare. "What's this?" I asked. "A second basket," she said, setting it next to the washer. "For your stuff." I blinked. "I mean, we already shared the first one." She shrugged. "I know, but I realized today, while standing in the detergent aisle, that I wasn't scared of seeing our clothes mixed together anymore. In fact, I wanted it. I wanted to see your t-shirts under my sweaters, your socks rolled up with mine. It made the idea of us feel real, so I bought another one, not to separate our stuff, but because I know how much you hate folding fitted sheets, and I figured this way, we can take turns without arguing." It was such a simple thing, a second basket. And yet, it felt like the most profound gesture of all, because love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it shows up in aisle 8 of the grocery store, wrapped in the realization that letting someone in doesn't mean losing yourself, it means gaining room to grow. That night, after dinner, Claire stood in the laundry room, folding towels, her head tilted as she worked with gentle care. I watched her for a long time before stepping behind her and wrapping my arms around her waist. "I used to hate this room," she said softly. "Every time I walked in here, I'd remember the silence, the loneliness, the machine that sat untouched. For too long, and now?" I asked. "Now it smells like your soap," she whispered, "and the silence feels like peace, not absence. Because you're here." I kissed the top of her head. "I'll always be here." She turned in my arms, her eyes shining. I know. We stood there for a while, holding each other in the same place where the story had begun, over a broken appliance and a quiet confession. But this time nothing was broken. And the confession wasn't about pain, but about presence, about how two people, both carrying their own scars, had stumbled into something stronger than either of them expected, about how a washing machine became the beginning of a new chapter neither of us saw coming, and about how sometimes one vulnerable sentence to change the entire course of your life. Winter settled in completely, blanketing the town in soft whites and silvers. The holidays came and went, and for the first time in years, Claire didn't spend them alone. We decorated her tree together, her with the delicate ceramic ornaments she'd kept hidden away since her divorce, me with the slightly ridiculous wooden ones I'd carved back in high school shop class. It was mismatched, weird, wonderful, like us. On Christmas morning, she made French toast while I brewed coffee. We exchanged small gifts. I gave her a handmade brush holder for her art supplies. And she gave me a leather-bound notebook with the words, "Fixing Things," including people engraved on the front. I didn't cry, not then, but I came close. In the weeks that followed, we fell deeper into this life we'd stitched together from unexpected threads. I helped with errands. She helped with invoices when my small repair business picked up. Even painted a logo for my van, a simple design. But the day I stuck it on the side, I felt like I was building something bigger than just a career. I was building a life. One evening in February, we sat by the fireplace. Her head resting on my shoulder, the air thick with the kind of comfortable silence that only comes after everything important has already been said. "You ever think about how different things could have gone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the time," I said. "If I'd gotten a flat tire that day, if you'd called someone else, if you'd decided to just throw the machine out instead?" She smiled, eyes still on the fire. "Sometimes I wonder if I would have let you in if you hadn't come through that door carrying tools." "You mean if I wasn't useful?" I teased. "No, I mean, if I hadn't needed help, I might never have learned how to accept it." That hit me harder than I expected, because it was true for both of us. I'd spent so much of my life being the helper, the fixer, the one who patched things up and moved on. But with Claire, I learned that being let in is harder than stepping up, that it takes more courage to receive than to offer. And once you've been let in, really let in, it's not about what you can do anymore. It's about who you're willing to be. One snowy Saturday, we had guests, just a couple of friends from the gallery and one of my old buddies from the repair circuit. We cooked together, laughed too loud, played board games until midnight. At one point, someone asked how we met. Claire grinned and pointed at me. I fixed my washing machine and broke all my walls down in the process. Everyone laughed, but I just looked at her, knowing the truth behind those words, because yes, it started with the washing machine. But what really happened was that Claire had been brave enough to open the door, not just to her laundry room, but to her fears, her wounds, her real self. And I had been lucky enough, blessed really, to meet her there, that night after. Everyone left, and the house grew quiet again. Claire turned to me as we cleaned the dishes and said, "You know what's funny? I used to think that after divorce, the most dangerous thing was letting someone get close again. And now, I think the most dangerous thing would have been never letting anyone close again." I dried my hands and walked over, placing my forehead gently against hers. "You saved me," she whispered. "It's not by fixing things, by staying." I didn't have words, just held her, because sometimes the deepest truths don't need to be spoken. We didn't rush into anything formal after that. No proposal, no rings, not yet. But we started talking about the future in a way that had weight. Not if, but when. When we take that trip to the coast, when we renovate the studio, when we grow old enough to forget why we walked into a room, spring came slowly. The snow melted, the birds returned, the gallery rotated new artists in and out. But Claire's name remained on one wall, not the literal one anymore, but in the hearts of everyone who had seen her work, felt her courage, and for me. I kept fixing things, but now I had someone to come home to, someone who understood that. Love isn't loud, it's loyal. that it shows up in quiet mornings and mundane chores, that sometimes the greatest romance is found not in declarations, but in gestures, washing each other's dishes, folding laundry for two, and sitting silently together when the words run out. So here we are. A woman who once thought her heart had nothing left to give, and a man who thought all he was good for was patching up the broken dot together, still folding laundry, still building something that lasts. Not a fairy tale. It's just love. Real, imperfect, glorious love. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.